President Trump today criticizing NATO allies over their lack of support for the operation in Iran. To break down the latest, we welcome on John Sitilides, geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors. John, great to see you. Thanks for coming on. Now, President Trump on social media today saying, quote, without the U.S., NATO is a paper tiger. He then goes on to say, quote, they don't want to help open the Strait of Hormuz, a simple military maneuver that is the single reason for the high oil prices. Cowards, and we will remember. Now, John, several countries have pledged to help open the Strait of Hormuz, but we haven't yet seen any action. What is the president looking for out of these allies?
Well, thanks for having me, Jack. First of all, good to be with you again. We haven't had a firm commitment yet from any of the European countries. And I think they made a mistake earlier in the week when they offered an unconditional rejection of the president's request to assist. And I think what would have been wiser is to take the president's request under consideration, but explain that they are democratic countries. They have parliaments, they have opposition parties, they have elect voters to be accountable to. And so they needed the space and the depth to be able to have a debate and then determine whether or not they could assist the U.S. in the Gulf. And of course, they are dependent on the Gulf for oil and gas in a way simply the U.S. is not. But I think also the president's very harsh language, not just this week, but in prior instances, whether it was Greenland, whether it was Ukraine, has also sort of driven a little bit of a wedge between Washington and our allies in Europe. So I hope everyone can concentrate on the very challenging task at hand, look to see where some of the European countries in NATO will actually make a decision to deliver a measure of goods, whether it's personnel, whether it's equipment. For instance, Jack, the Baltic countries are extraordinarily experienced at minesweeping, and we're going to need that to be able to open the Strait of Hormuz. So I think over time, a number of countries will make that commitment, and then I think we'll have a stronger coalition, not only with the U.S. and our NATO countries, but it's also very important that our Gulf Arab allies in the region stand up for their own defense and deliver both personnel and hardware to the larger U.S.-led coalition effort.
And the U.S. In all of this doesn't really rely on oil from the Strait of Hormuz, making up less than 2% of total U.S. oil consumption. Here's a clip of President Trump earlier today. Let's watch.
We don't use the Strait. The United States, we don't need it. Europe needs it. Korea, Japan, China, a lot of other people. So they'll have to get involved a little bit on that.
John, how do you see the impact of these Iranian strikes on ships there, on the impact on global foreign policy dynamics?
Well, the president is right about the basic dependence of our East Asian and European allies for hydrocarbons coming out of the Persian Gulf. This is not really a core U.S. interest anymore, but what is in our interest is that the economies of our allies be as prosperous and as robust as possible. So we're there to defend the shipping routes that provide the energy these countries need to feed their societies and to provide robust industrial output for the global economy. And this is also part of the larger alliance network that has been in place since the end of World War II, because our Asian allies and our European allies are not able to defend those shipping lanes on their own. They don't have lift capability, and especially in Europe, ever since the end of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, have really gone for butter over guns and provided for extraordinarily generous cradle-to-grave welfare entitlement benefits for their societies at the expense of core defense needs, which, of course, was exposed by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Europe pleading with the United States to come to Ukraine's defense when that was really a European security issue, not an American issue. But this is so complex right now, Jack, in terms of where Russia will potentially gain with the increasing for oil and gas, and Europe possibly having to reconnect pipelines from sanctioned Russian facilities, but also losing because potentially if we do defeat Iran, and I hope that's going to be the case, I'm confident it will be, I don't know how long it'll take, Russia will lose its most important ally in the Gulf region. And for China, right now, they have benefited tremendously from deeply discounted Iranian oil, providing about 10% of all of the shipped oil to China from around the world, and also looking to diminish the power of the U.S. dollar by buying that Iranian oil using yuan or renminbi instead of the U.S. dollar. And so hopefully, if we have the kind of outcome that we're seeking to accomplish, and right now the U.S. military is utterly pulverizing the Iranian military. So the military campaign is succeeding, but we need political victories and economic victories. And that really only comes about when we have the regular flow of oil and liquefied natural gas out of Hormuz, hopefully starting in the weeks and months ahead.
And if we get that Strait of Hormuz open and these operations are successful, China loses that reliance that it has on Iranian oil. And that may be the case, but we've also seen the loss of the Maduro regime in Venezuela, losing oil there. Mm-hmm. What would a loss of oil from Iran do to China's entire economic model?
Well, I don't foresee a loss of Iranian oil. What I do see, Jack, is greater U.S. influence over the flow of oil to China. And that's really, I think, the leverage that President Trump is seeking, especially after we had the very difficult situation back in October of 2025, when President Trump had raised tariffs on China and Xi Jinping came back with a cutoff of the delivery of rare earth elements that are so critical to our defense industrial base and really to every sector of the American economy. I mean, we right now have such a technologically based economy. Everything requires magnets, semiconductors, and the like that can only be manufactured using China's rare earth elements exports. So I think what President Trump wants to be able to do, if and when the summit is rescheduled between President Trump and General Secretary Xi, is to come back and say, well, if you're going to threaten us with the cutoff of rare earth elements, we're going to be able to control the flow of oil to your economy. This will give Trump much greater leverage going forward than what would have been the case if we had no influence or no control over the oil coming out of the Gulf region.
And not only that, they may have to use the U.S. dollar to buy that oil. Now, I want to get into
Absolutely.
China has been investing heavily in Iran over the decades. Iran's been now hitting oil and civilian infrastructure in Gulf nations. Now, China has also been working to build influence in those countries, in those Gulf nations, and China's close alliance with Iran, considering that, giving them technology for their weapon systems. How might this Iran shooting down civilian infrastructure in these Gulf countries impact those Gulf countries' relations with China?
I think it's pretty much going to move in a very clear direction, Jack, and that is that the Gulf Arab leaders are going to very seriously reconsider their ties with China. I think they were under the illusion that they were largely immune from these types of China-supported Iranian military attacks against civilian infrastructure, against oil and gas infrastructure. And now China has been exposed not only as an ally of Iran, but a very strong supporter of Iran diplomatically, as we just discussed, financially, by trying to move away from the dollar dominance in the form of the petrodollar. But keep in mind also, China has been providing massive infrastructure to Iran, not only to be able to attack Gulf Arab countries, but the Huawei infrastructure system that they built into the Tehran and other Iranian city facilities has brought about a facial recognition infrastructure that allowed the Iranian regime to kill, 10, 20, 30, 35,000 Iranians in a matter of days, a month and a half ago. That was Chinese infrastructure. It's that kind of very malign surveillance systems, techno-authoritarian systems that China was very happy to sell to Iran. Iran was very happy to purchase from China. And I think it sends a very negative signal to UAE, to Saudi, to Bahrain, to Qatar, that China is not the kind of partner or ally that will help these countries deal with any type of a future threat or has their best interests at heart. I think it'll be a very different direction for Chinese diplomacy in a very negative downward direction with the Arab countries that have suffered because of the China-Iran alliance.
We'll have to see how they react with their infrastructure now built up by China in some areas, rip and replace maybe. Well, John Sitilides, great talking to you, and thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today. Really appreciate it.